Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 35. Return of the Dumbass. By the time Izuku had collapsed into his nest, he was dead on his feet. He'd meant to check his burn before he fell asleep, but the moment he wasn't supporting his own weight, he was out like a light. He woke up to the grating sound of his alarm and pain radiating from his side. Shit, he really needed to check that. Quickly, he silenced the alarm and flipped the lights on. He was still in his vigilante getup, black eyeshadow and everything. He really needed to get a mask because that stuff was really annoying to take off. Unzipping his hoodie, pulling up his shirt, and peeling back the bandages, he was pleasantly surprised to see that it wasn't too bad. It hurt quite a bit, and he probably had a bruise that he couldn't make out under all the burned tissue, but he was largely okay, or at least as okay as he was previously. He went through the familiar motions of redressing the burn before he got ready to go to the library. He was going to have a lot of questions to answer today after he ran off last Tuesday, but he'd come up with a story. He'd keep up the lie that his father worked in America. It had worked for years, so Izuku figured if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And if Shinso asked about his mom, he'd say she was a traveling nurse because that wasn't too far from the truth. All the best lies were rooted in some sort of truth. His mother is a nurse, and she did travel. She just didn't come back. But Shinso didn't need to know that. If Shinso asked why he had to go to the library to send a fake email, well, he'd have to come up with something. Hopefully he wouldn't ask about that. Hitoshi hadn't seen Midoriya for a full week now, and he was getting more concerned with each passing day. He looked incredibly ill last time he'd seen him, and then he ran away when Hitoshi asked if he was safe at home, like a bumbling idiot. There wasn't even anything he or his mom could do. They had no grounds to get the police involved, and he didn't have his number or know where he lived. The only identifying information he had about him was his name and where he went to school, and they couldn't exactly waltz in there asking about him. They had no clue who they were, and they wouldn't tell them anything. He'd stalked through every social media he could think of looking for a way to contact him, but he couldn't find anything. So for the time being, he was just left to pull his hair out. It was almost time for the library to open, and like he had been every day since Midoriya had run off, he was sitting in his usual spot, bouncing his leg and biting his nails with his eyes trained on the door. Unlike every other day, at 6:30 on the dot, Greenie came strolling in. He couldn't have stopped himself from shooting to his feet if he tried. "Midoriya!" he exclaimed as he all but ran over to him. He looked so much better than he had the last time he saw him. The color was back in his cheeks, he wasn't sweating buckets, and he didn't look like he was one strong breeze from falling over. For all the worrying he didn't put any thought into how he would broach the topic once he returned. He stopped a few steps away and stared at him dumbly for a moment. Luckily, he was saved by his mom peeking out from the stacks to see what the commotion was. "Midoriya, you're back! We've been so worried. Are you feeling better?" she asked across the room at a volume she would tell anyone else off for using at a library. Sorry, I didn't mean to worry you guys. I'm doing much better now. Thank you," he said with a small bow. His mom gestured the two of them over to some lounge seats, and they followed obediently. She glanced at Hitoshi for a second before she started. "I wanted to check in with you, dear," she said to Midoriya with a reserved tone. "Toshi told me some of the stuff you said, but don't be mad at him. He just wants to help. We both do, so I just need to make sure you're all right at home." Midoriya looked like he was expecting this talk because he didn't freak out like Hitoshi thought he would. Yes, Shinso-san. I'm fine at home. My Parents just work a lot, he explained as he fidgeted with his hands. His mom frowned at that but didn't push it. Okay, just know that we're here if you ever need anything. I mean that, she said with the utmost sincerity. Hitoshi may not have been able to feel her worry over the past week like she could feel his, but he could see it. She would come peek into the computer room every morning to see if he was back, and would ask Hitoshi if he'd heard from him daily. It would make me feel better if you had our numbers, she said as she ripped a piece of paper from a notepad and scribbled down the digits. You can call or text us at any time, okay? Greenie hesitantly took the paper she held out to him. He looked incredibly uncomfortable now. Thank you, Shinso-san, he said with another bow. She smiled at him and ruffled Hitoshi's hair before dismissing them back to the computer room. The two of them sat in silence for a few awkward moments before Hitoshi spoke up. Are you really okay, Midoriya? He asked because something still didn't sit right. Now that he had spent a week percolating on all the ways Midoriya's odd behavior would make sense if he was being abused, he couldn't get the idea out of his head. All the pieces had fallen into place, and the answer fit too well for him to be convinced that everything was fine. Yeah, Shinso, I'm fine. I swear, Greenie said back without meeting his eyes. I've got some homework to catch up on, though, he said, shutting down any follow-up questions Satoshi might have had. Freaking hell, he was going to need to get a second burner phone. Damn it. The Shinsos were far too kind to him for him to turn around and ignore their request, but he didn't have a cent to his name right now. If he didn't get the chance to pickpocket someone tonight, he was screwed. Honestly, he was screwed regardless. Pickpocketing around a racer wasn't a reliable income. He had to figure something out. Maybe he could try to sell some scrap metal from Dagobah? He couldn't lug heavy metal around right now, but once he healed up, it would be a good way to work on his muscle mass as well. In the meantime, well, he could worry about that tonight. He managed to swipe some money for the cheapest burner they sold at the 24-hour store in Uptown. Whether or not Eraser noticed was hard to say, but he said nothing about it. He didn't say much of anything the whole night. He tended to be a man of few words, but today he was quiet to the point that it was off-putting. Not that it mattered. Whether he was lost in his thoughts or not, he didn't let it get in the way of his work, and the night went off without a hitch. They walked into the store, forgetting they probably looked ready to rob the place in their full vigilante garb, so they were a bit confused for a moment when the cashier hastily handed over the phone and took their money without saying a word. That probably wasn't the best play, but he didn't see any security cameras, so it should be fine. They'd have to tell the Shinsos that they paid by the minute message, so they didn't blow up their phone, because the amount they prepaid wasn't going to last long regardless. After he got home and changed out of his vigilante garb, he took a moment to set up the phone and added the two numbers he had gotten earlier, then sent off a quick message. Midoriya, 4:29 a.m. Hey Shinso, sorry for the late text, but I wanted to send you my number before I forgot again. Also, please don't blow up my phone too much. My plan is paid by minute and message. Shinso, 4:30 a.m. Don't worry about the late message. I never sleep anyways. I'll let my mom know too. What the hell was Shinso doing up at 4:30 a.m.? Whatever. He figured insomnia's a bitch, and Izuku was too tired to ask. The next morning, when he walked into the library, there was a bagel with cream cheese sitting on the desk where he normally sat. He glanced over at Shinso, who was munching on a matching bagel, so he furrowed his brows in a wordless question. My mom was worried, and she's insisting that she brings you breakfast from now on. Sorry, he answered with a grimace. She made him a bagel? That's so nice. And she was going to keep doing it? Oh, Kami, he doesn't deserve this. They were so nice, and he was lying to them about everything. But even so, his heart melted at the gesture, and again he was overcome with the overwhelming knowledge that this wasn't going to end well. She also wanted me to ask if there's a day of the week you could come over for dinner, Hitoshi said as he put his bagel down and started picking at his nails. You don't have to, but I thought we could try and work on those martial arts moves you were researching. Maybe we could learn together. Kami, how can he not flinch when someone points a gun at him? But the second someone does something nice, he's a blubbering mess. He felt like he was about to cry, and given Shinso's reaction, he probably looked like it too. He took a seat and nodded, not trusting his voice. He took a bite of the bagel and let himself calm down before responding properly. Yeah, Shinso, that would be nice. Thank you, he choked out. Shinso looked concerned, but blessedly he didn't mention it. Yeah, of course. Hopefully you can make it to my house without looking like you took a surprise swim next time, he teased back with a chuckle in an attempt to lighten the mood. Izuku let out a good-natured scoff at that. Yeah, the rainy season's gonna end soon, so hopefully that won't happen again, he replied. They made plans to meet that Thursday, and Izuku made sure to thank Shinso-san profusely before he left. On Thursday, after he verified that the weather was set to remain clear, he stood partially hidden by the front gate after school and watched as Katsuki turned to walk home. Yes! If he ran, he would be able to make the 3:45 train and save himself a half-hour's walk. The burn on his side was healing nicely, but it was still draining his energy, so he took breaks whenever he could. The 10-minute train ride took him to a 5-minute walk away from the Shinso's house. When he knocked on the door, Shinso answered with a towel in his hand, and they both burst out laughing. He clearly inherited his mother's humor, and Izuku was glad he was finally letting it shine. After greeting Shinso-san, Shinso led him to the backyard. It wasn't massive, but there was room for a patio, a good patch of grass, and a large tree in the back corner. The tree had one large branch that cast nearly the entire yard in spotted shade, and a swing hung crooked off of it with one of the ropes no longer connected and dragging on the ground. All right, Greenie-sensei, where do we start? Shinso asked with a theatrical bow. Izuku giggled for a moment before lightly hitting his shoulder to get him to stand up straight again. Well, I guess we should start with the basics, he replied. You need to have a good fighting stance, like this. He squared his shoulders, offset his feet, and brought his arms up in front of him defensively. You want to make sure you've got good balance, but you're not too stiff because you need to move with the hits rather than trying to keep your ground and getting knocked over. Shinso mirrored his stance pretty well, but his feet were still too close together, so Izuku corrected him before proceeding. You should always protect your head, but I'm not trying to brain you, so I won't aim above the shoulders. Oh, thanks, Midoriya. Go easy on me. You're too kind. Hitoshi quipped back with a smirk. He stopped himself from making a snide comment right back like he would with Eraser before he realized he didn't need to. If the banter he'd heard between Shinso and his mother was anything to go by, he knew that Shinso could take a joke. I'm getting you back for beating me in Mario Kart last time, he said before promptly sweeping Shinso's legs out from under him. Shinso looked up at him, sprawled in the grass in confusion for a second before exclaiming, Midoriya, what the hell was that? How did you do that? Izuku gave a shy facsimile of Eraser's sadistic grin before offering up a hand and pulling Shinso back to his feet. I've been practicing? What, while you were on death's doorstep with the plague? Shinso shot back. No! I've been practicing for years, kind of, but more so in the last, 10 months, he said with a bit of a blush. You really did come over to beat me up out back, didn't you? Shinso asked, seeming to resign himself to his fate. Maybe. You can crush me in Mario Kart later if that makes you feel better, Izuku replied, trying his best to stifle a laugh. Shinso rolled his eyes and got back into the fighting stance he'd just been knocked out of. I'll hold you to that, Greenie. Now, show me how you did that. Izuku got into place again. Slowly, he added, as Izuku went to sweep his legs out from under him for a second time. Izuku had to get over a bout of laughter before he slowly went through how he did what he did a few times over. By the time Shinso-san called them in for dinner, Shinso was probably sporting a few new bruises, but Izuku was no worse for wear. End of chapter.